The newspapers, tabloid magazines, and TV news all covered his death and remarked about his long and amazing career. But many did not know that he was a United States Marine who served in the Pacific during World War II.
A dying Hollywood legend finally broke his silence and revealed something about Clint Eastwood that nobody in the industry was prepared to hear. Lee Marvin had kept it buried for nearly 2 decades. 2 decades of parties and polished interviews where he cracked jokes while saying absolutely nothing about what really happened in those Oregon mountains in 1968. But near the end of his life, Marvin finally spoke. What he revealed about Eastwood, the woman who fell apart between them, the film that nearly destroyed both their careers, and the secret he witnessed up close, shocked everyone who heard it. And it all started long before any of them ever set foot on that mountain. The making of Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin was born on February 19, 1924, in New York City, into a family that looked polished from the outside. His father ran a successful advertising business. His mother wrote for fashion publications. The family name itself carried a specific kind of weight. Both boys were named after Confederate Civil War figures, with Lee named in honor of General Robert E. Lee. On paper, it was a comfortable, successful household. Inside it, Lee Marvin was a complete disaster. School was a battlefield he lost repeatedly. He picked fights, skipped class, and broke every rule placed in front of him before teachers even finished explaining what the rules were. Doctors eventually identified dyslexia and ADHD, which put names to the struggles that had been wrecking his academic life since day one. Learning felt like a daily war, and most days Marvin walked out bruised. What kept him going were 2 completely different obsessions. He picked up the violin, a delicate and unlikely choice for a kid who lived rough and restless. And alongside those quiet strings came a second pull toward hunting, tracking game through woods with total focus and pure adrenaline. 2 versions of the same person fighting for space inside one body, and neither one had any room left for classrooms or lecture halls. After getting expelled from multiple college prep programs and a socialist boarding school in upstate New York, Marvin made his own decision. He was done. The academic world was not built for him, and he was not going to keep pretending otherwise. In 1942, the world was at war, and Lee Marvin walked straight into it. He enlisted in the United States Marines at 18 and was deployed to the Pacific Theater. The island of Saipan became the location where his entire understanding of what it meant to be alive permanently changed. Machine gun fire tore through his unit during a firefight, and Marvin survived, but just barely. A burst of bullets ripped into his lower back and hips, injuries so severe that they should have killed him. He was evacuated, treated, and eventually received the Purple Heart. When he came home in 1945, honorably discharged and officially a hero, America had nothing waiting for him. The label of war veteran opened exactly 0 doors. His first job was working as a plumber's assistant, hauling tools through basements and crawl spaces, returning home exhausted and covered in grease every night. The turning point into acting happened by pure accident. A community theater production lost an actor mid-show. Someone in the company, desperate and panicked, pointed at Marvin and asked him to step in. He had no training, no preparation, and no idea what he was doing. He walked onto that stage, and something inside him clicked that had never clicked anywhere else. He found the thing that school could not teach and that war could not silence. A new direction that felt completely his own. He hustled through off-Broadway productions across New York, taking every role available, learning fast, and proving quickly that he could hold a stage. Broadway came next, with a small role in a production called Billy. It was minor, but it was the beginning of something that would not stop building. The Oscar, the chaos, and the woman he left behind. In 1950, Lee Marvin packed up and headed to Los Angeles, ready to compete in the most cutthroat industry in America. What he brought with him was something no acting coach could manufacture. He had lived through real combat, he did not need to study how to hold a weapon convincingly or how to make danger look real. Those things were already burned into his body. Directors noticed immediately. Word spread through the industry, the way it always does when something genuinely different walks onto a set. His film debut came in 1951 in a Navy comedy called You Are in the Navy Now, shot partly in Virginia. When the production moved to Hollywood for additional filming, Marvin stayed. That single decision planted him permanently inside the industry. Small roles stacked up quickly. By 1952, he appeared in 5 films in a single year, none of them landing him at the top of the credits, but all of them making people pay attention. The role that changed public perception came in the violent crime film The Big Heat in 1953, where Marvin played a gangster who threw scalding coffee in the face of actress Gloria Graham. Audiences gasped. The scene was brutal and disturbingly convincing, and people walked out of theaters quietly, wondering how much of that aggression was performance and how much was just Lee Marvin being himself. The question was not entirely unfair. Television gave him the breakthrough that films had not yet delivered. In 1957, he landed the lead role of Chicago Detective Lieutenant Frank Ballinger in the weekly series M Squad. For the first time, his name was on top of the screen. Viewers connected with him immediately. The show ran for 117 episodes and gave Marvin the kind of sustained weekly exposure that transforms an actor into a recognizable face in living rooms across the country. When M Squad ended, the silence that followed hit hard. An entire year passed without a single offer. Depression settled in. Then John Wayne himself reached out and invited Marvin to join the Western The Comancheros in 1961, which led directly to their legendary collaboration in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance in 1962, where Marvin played the villain with a cold precision that held its own against both Wayne and James Stewart in the same frame. The year 1965 changed everything for Lee Marvin in ways that went far beyond professional achievement. He took on a comedy western called Cat Ballou, playing a dual role as both a washed-up gunfighter and his twin brother, villain. It was a completely different kind of performance from anything he had done before. Most of the cast believed that Marvin's drinking actually enhanced the role, loosening up something in his delivery that made him genuinely funny rather than simply menacing. Jane Fonda, the film's star, was considerably less charmed, keeping her distance as his off-screen behavior wore on her patience throughout filming. Awards season arrived, and the industry did something nobody had predicted. Lee Marvin won the Academy Award for Best Actor, beating out competition that included Laurence Olivier, Rod Steiger, and Richard Burton. Names everyone assumed were untouchable. But on that night, Marvin walked away with the golden statue that redefined what kind of star he was from that moment forward. His paycheck tripled, his fame exploded, his drinking also intensified in direct proportion. That same year, on the set of Ship of Fools, Marvin met Michelle Triola, a club singer and dancer with a small role in the film. Within weeks of meeting her, he had moved in with her, leaving behind his marriage without hesitation. Michelle later said that meeting him had changed everything about her life, and she was not exaggerating. She believed in the relationship completely, changed her last name to Marvin, gave up her singing career to follow him from set to set, and waited for him to make things official. He never did. While living with Michelle, Marvin quietly returned to his hometown and showed up unannounced at the house of Pamela Feely, the woman he had been involved with in 1945, the woman he had abandoned when she became pregnant at 17, and the subsequent illegal abortion nearly killed her. He had told her he was leaving for the summer and never came back. Now, 25 years later, he stood in her kitchen and told her he had returned for her. Michelle knew nothing about any of this. She was back in California, still waiting. The collision between all three lives was coming, and nobody was ready for it. The movie that changed everything. By 1968, Lee Marvin was one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood and about to walk straight into the most chaotic production in film history. The project was Paint Your Wagon, a massive musical western that Paramount Pictures had assembled with the budget and ambition of a studio trying to replicate the success of their earlier blockbuster, My Fair Lady. The original stage musical, written by Alan J. Lerner and Frederick Lowe, had been a respectable Broadway success back in 1951. The film adaptation was supposed to be enormous in every sense of the word. Marvin received $1 million for the role of Ben Rumson, a rough, loud, hard-drinking prospector living in a lawless mining settlement during the California Gold Rush. He accepted without hesitation. The offer sitting on the other side of his desk, Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, paid less and had fewer zeros attached. Marvin walked away from what would become a universally celebrated masterpiece of American cinema, a film now preserved in the National Film Registry, in exchange for a mountain musical that history would treat considerably less kindly. The other star was a man whose career was moving in an entirely different direction. Clint Eastwood had just come off a string of Sergio Leone westerns that made him one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. He had built his entire reputation on silence, economy, and a coiled physical presence that made every line he delivered feel twice as heavy for having waited. He was not a singer. He was not a musical theater performer. He was the man with no name, and everything that title implied. He signed on anyway. Eastwood later said the original pitch excited him. The project was supposed to be darker, grittier, and more progressive than the typical Hollywood musical, with themes that included an interracial romance and a genuine attempt to disrupt the safe conventions of the genre. That version of the film never existed anywhere except in the description that convinced him to sign the contract. The location chosen was Eagle Creek Valley in northeastern Oregon, a stunning stretch of wilderness that looked extraordinary on film and was nearly impossible to reach by any normal means. A 2-hour drive over brutal dirt roads separated the valley from the nearest town. The solution was helicopters, expensive and constant, flying cast and crew up the mountain and back down every single day. Construction crews spent 7 months building an entire fictional town from scratch. Full-sized wooden buildings, handcrafted and planted in the wilderness, each one sitting on hydraulic lifts so the collapse sequence at the film's climax could be executed practically. Tunnels were dug beneath the dirt streets, specifically engineered to cave in on cue. The set alone cost $2.4 million before a single frame of film had been shot. Governor Tom McCall of Oregon personally cut the ribbon at the set's opening ceremony, treating the whole construction project as a state achievement. The nearby town of Baker had never hosted anything like it. 400 cast and crew members moved in. Paramount spent thousands every week simply feeding them. Filming officially began in May 1968, and almost nothing went according to plan from that first day forward. The problems started at the top and worked their way down through every level of the production until almost everyone involved was miserable. Alan J. Lerner, the musical's original co-creator, who had signed on as a producer, hovered around the set constantly and overruled director Joshua Logan whenever the mood struck him. Logan had an established career of his own, having directed South Pacific, Camelot, and Bus Stop. He was not accustomed to being second-guessed publicly on his own set. The tension between the two men was visible and constant, and it drained the energy out of the production daily. Screenwriter Paddy Chayefsky had already rewritten the original Broadway script beyond recognition. Major characters were removed. Entire storylines were replaced. The interracial romance that had drawn Eastwood to the project was quietly dropped. What remained was a looser, more freewheeling story about a woman simultaneously married to 2 men in a gold rush mining camp, a premise that earned the film the very first M rating in MPA history when it was eventually completed. Lee Marvin drank real alcohol throughout filming. Director Logan tried repeatedly to make him stop and failed completely. The delays caused by Marvin's drinking were significant and well documented. Retakes multiplied. Shooting days stretched longer than scheduled. The crew worked long hours in brutal conditions, while their lead actor showed up to set on his own terms. the weather turned against the production in waves. Temperatures hit over 100 degrees Fahrenheit for stretches during summer filming. Then, in August, came the first rain in 35 years. It poured hard enough to shut everything down for nearly a month. October brought snow to the Oregon mountains, and the production had no answer for it. Cameras eventually stopped rolling, and the entire crew relocated back to Hollywood to finish what remained. Clint Eastwood watched all of this with mounting frustration and said very little publicly. He later described the delays as the experience that solidified his determination to become a director himself, because he never again wanted to be dependent on someone else's decisions about when and whether a camera rolled. What he did not say publicly, and what Lee Marvin eventually said near the end of his life, was what was happening on that mountain between the cast members when the cameras were not rolling. The secret Lee Marvin finally told. Jean Seberg arrived on the set of Paint Your Wagon as an accomplished actress with an already complicated personal life, but also with an openness to whatever the production, and perhaps life itself, might bring. Despite the difficult conditions surrounding the film, she threw herself into the experience with complete sincerity. None of the people working on the production could have predicted that what began as another Hollywood movie would become one of the most painful chapters of her life. During filming, Seberg fell deeply in love with Clint Eastwood. Friends would later recall that she described the experience as feeling like falling off a cliff without any warning. It was sudden, overwhelming, and absolute. To her, the relationship was not a passing romance or another Hollywood affair. She genuinely believed it represented the beginning of an entirely new future. As their relationship intensified, Seberg began confiding in those closest to her. She spoke openly about ending her marriage to acclaimed author Romain Gary and beginning a new life with Eastwood once production wrapped. She wasn't simply imagining possibilities, she was making plans. Those around her understood just how serious she had become. When Gary eventually learned about the affair, his reaction was dramatic even by Hollywood standards. Furious and deeply wounded, he challenged Clint Eastwood to an actual duel. Although the confrontation never took place, the challenge itself revealed just how emotionally explosive the situation had become. News of the conflict spread through the cast and crew, creating an atmosphere of tension that extended far beyond the cameras. The production was already struggling with endless delays, difficult weather, and creative disagreements. Now, personal relationships had become another source of instability. Despite the growing chaos around her, Seberg remained convinced that everything would ultimately work out. She even informed her publicist that she intended to announce her divorce, believing without hesitation that Eastwood would publicly stand beside her when the time came. From her perspective, she wasn't risking everything for uncertainty. She believed she was stepping toward the next chapter of her life with someone who felt exactly the same way. What she never realized was that Eastwood was already involved with someone else throughout the production. While his relationship with Seberg unfolded, Eastwood was simultaneously carrying on an affair with another woman working on the same film, an extra whom he had personally helped secure a job on the production. Years later, that woman confirmed the relationship had continued for roughly 2 years, and that Jean Seberg had remained completely unaware of it the entire time. The truth transformed the story into something far more painful than a simple love triangle. Seberg believed she was building a future. In reality, she never possessed the complete picture. When filming finally ended and everyone returned to Los Angeles, the ending she had imagined never came. Instead of beginning a new life together, Eastwood simply disappeared from her life. There were no phone calls, no explanation, no final conversation, no closure of any kind. Seberg had ended her marriage, believing Eastwood would be waiting on the other side of that decision. Instead, she found only silence. Lee Marvin witnessed virtually every stage of this painful story from the inside. Unlike journalists or later biographers piecing events together years afterward, Marvin observed the emotional reality as it unfolded in real time. He saw the intensity of the relationship, the complete confidence Seberg placed in what she believed was a shared future, and the devastating realization that everything she had trusted had collapsed. Near the end of his life, Marvin finally spoke openly about what he had witnessed during that production. Reflecting on those events decades later, he admitted that watching the situation unfold permanently shaped the way he viewed Clint Eastwood. What happened between Eastwood and Seberg stayed with him long after the cameras stopped rolling. Marvin described what happened to Gene Seberg on that mountain as one of the cruelest things he had personally witnessed during his years in Hollywood. Not because heartbreak was unusual in the film industry, it certainly wasn't, but because of the extraordinary level of trust Seberg had placed in something that ultimately proved to be an illusion. To Marvin, that complete belief made the outcome especially difficult to watch. Sadly, Gene Seberg never truly recovered from that period of her life. The years that followed became increasingly difficult. She endured growing personal deterioration, intense surveillance by the FBI because of her political activism, and an escalating struggle with her mental health. Those pressures accumulated over time until her life came to a tragic end in Paris in August 1979, when she was only 40 years old. People closest to her would later point back to the events of 1968 as the period when the emotional damage first began to take hold. While the personal lives of those involved were unraveling, the film itself was heading toward an entirely different disaster. Once principal photography ended, the project entered the editing room where director Joshua Logan expected to shape the final version. Under his contract, he had earned the right to assemble his own director's cut after surviving months of impossible production conditions. That opportunity never came. Instead, Alan J. Lerner stepped into the editing process and reshaped the film according to his own creative preferences. Scene by scene, the movie was reconstructed until Logan barely recognized the material he had fought so hard to capture. The finished version stretched to an astonishing 165 minutes, leaving audiences to experience every minute of its excessive length. When Paint Your Wagon premiered in New York City on October 15, 1969, the critical response was swift and unforgiving. Columnist Rex Reed dismissed the film as a monument to unparalleled incompetence. Roger Ebert awarded it just 2 out of 4 stars, criticizing the musical score as cold and emotionally distant, comparing it to a polished studio recording inserted into a film that desperately needed something more human and alive. Audiences proved similarly divided, and the commercial disappointment forced Paramount Pictures to take an immediate write-off of $11 million, a staggering financial loss that confirmed the production had become one of Hollywood's most expensive disappointments. Yet, almost unbelievably, one unexpected success emerged from the wreckage. Lee Marvin's rough, gravelly performance of Wanderin' Star became an international hit. His unpolished rendition climbed all the way to #1 on the United Kingdom charts and ultimately earned him a gold record. Ironically, Gene Seberg had once described Marvin's singing voice as sounding like rain gurgling down a rusty pipe. That imperfect quality, the very thing that seemed least suited for a musical, became exactly what audiences connected with. A man who never claimed to be a singer accidentally delivered one of the biggest musical hits associated with the film. It was perhaps the strangest and most unlikely success to emerge from one of the most chaotic productions Hollywood had seen in years. For Clint Eastwood, however, there was no comparable silver lining. When he finally watched the completed film, he reportedly sank into his seat in disappointment. Years later, he admitted publicly that the experience had been so discouraging, it made him seriously consider walking away from acting altogether. The darker, more experimental project he had originally agreed to make no longer existed. In its place stood an overlong, confused spectacle that clashed sharply with the screen persona he had spent years building. For Eastwood, Paint Your Wagon became more than a commercial disappointment. It became a lasting reminder of what can happen when enormous ambition, powerful egos, and unchecked confidence collide without anyone able or willing to prevent the entire production from collapsing under its own weight. What Lee Marvin couldn't forget. While the film was self-destructing in theaters, Lee Marvin's personal life was completing a collapse of its own. Michelle Triola, who had changed her last name to Marvin and given up her career to follow him across the world for 7 years, learned that he planned to marry Pamela Feely instead. She responded with a lawsuit that rewrote California legal history. The case, Marvin versus Marvin, argued that long-term cohabiting partnerships deserved financial recognition equivalent to marriage, even without a marriage certificate. Michelle testified to the pregnancy losses she had experienced during their relationship, the career she had abandoned to support his, and the specific promise Marvin had made early in their relationship that what was his was hers. The verdict awarded her $14,000, a fraction of the $3.6 million she had sought. Both parties claimed victory. The real victory went to California law, which used the case to establish the concept of palimony, changing how cohabiting couples could seek financial protection when a long-term relationship ended. The case made news far beyond the entertainment industry. Michelle Triola later found genuine happiness with actor Dick Van Dyke, sharing his life for more than 30 years, though they never married either. Lee Marvin married Pamela Feely, the woman he had abandoned as a teenager 25 years earlier. And then he drifted back to the only world that had ever fully made sense to him: movie sets, long shoots, and the bottle that never stayed closed for long. His final years brought physically demanding roles that his aging body paid a visible price for. By the time he appeared in Dirty Dozen, The Next Mission in 1985, nearly 20 years after the original film, audiences could see exactly how much those years had cost. His final performance came in Delta Force with Chuck Norris in 1986, a film that made it clear to everyone watching, including Marvin himself, that the era of Lee Marvin as an action lead was over. In December 1986, after a major surgery for a dangerously inflamed colon, Lee Marvin suffered a heart attack. He was 63 years old. He died at home in Tucson, Arizona. Near the end of his life, Lee Marvin broke the professional silence he had maintained about Paint Your Wagon and about Clint Eastwood for nearly 2 decades. He talked about the drinking, which surprised nobody. He talked about the chaos of the Oregon production, which surprised nobody either. What surprised people was the directness with which he addressed what he had watched happen to Gene Seberg on that mountain and his view of the man responsible for it. Marvin described the Seberg situation as a woman who had been handled with a carelessness that left permanent damage. He did not dress up what he had witnessed or give it softer language. He said what he believed happened was that a woman who trusted completely had been used and then discarded without a second thought, and that the way it was done, without any acknowledgement or closure, was something he had not been able to shake even 20 years later. He also spoke about the film itself with more complexity than the simple disaster narrative that surrounded it. He acknowledged that Wanderin' Star had connected with people in ways that surprised even him. He admitted that the role of Ben Rumson, despite everything surrounding the production, was genuinely suited to who he was as a performer, in a way that few of his later roles had matched. He had been given a character who drank, lived rough, made questionable choices, and somehow remained the most honest person in every room he occupied. That was Lee Marvin in a nutshell, and he knew it. What he revealed about Eastwood was not a scorched earth attack. It was something more considered, and in some ways more devastating. He described a man who had extraordinary talent, who was already clearly becoming something significant in the industry, and who handled the people around him on that production with a coldness that matched the Oregon winter. He respected the talent. He did not respect the behavior. The words Marvin said near the end of his life were not designed to destroy Eastwood's legacy. They were the honest accounting of a witness who had kept quiet long enough and believed the record deserved to be complete. before he was no longer around to complete it. Lee Marvin died knowing he had left that account on the record. That was enough for him. Lee Marvin lived the kind of life that generates decades of stories. The wars, the Oscar, the drinking, the lawsuits, the mountain that nearly swallowed an entire production whole. But what he said about Clint Eastwood near the end of his life carried more weight than most of it because it came from someone who was there, who saw everything, and who chose to finally say what he saw. Hit the like button and subscribe for more.